welcome to the national finals, guys. Start with a quick round of introductions. My name is Caitlin Johnston. I am a corporate lawyer. I live and work in New York City. I did meet people when I was your age, so congrats on being here and best of luck.
Hello, my name is Paul Millette. I'm an associate professor of political science at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
I'm Peter Gunn. I'm from New Hampshire, a long time Weed Beetle teacher. Taking a year off to do a little farming this year. I'll leave it there.
Would you introduce yourselves and your teacher?
Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Will Kosegi, and my favorite Supreme Court case is Lawrence v. Texas, as it combined the tangibility of privacy with the broader issue of homosexuality in the U.S.
Hi, my name is Savannah Pasquan, and my favorite Supreme Court case is Griswold v. Connecticut, for the privacy rights it established for women.
Hi, my name is Tanvir Gurwal, and my favorite Supreme Court case is Shelley v. Kramer, for its monumental contribution to the racial rights movement.
Hi, my name is Annabelle Banerjee, and my favorite Supreme Court case is Loving v. Virginia, as interracial marriage was legalized under the rationale of the 14th Amendment.
Hi, my name is Berta Billings, and my favorite Supreme Court case is Eisenstadt v. Baird, as the 14th Amendment prevailed and privacy rights were established for all. On behalf of Unit 5,
Gretchen Wolfing,
Thomas Senior High School,
In the state of Washington.
Thank you for joining us today.
Great. And your teacher? There she is. Okay, great. We are going to do question 1. I'm going to read it all the way through, and when I stop, you may begin. That'll start your time, okay? The religion, then, of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man, and it is the right of every man to exercise it as these may dictate. Do you agree or disagree with James Madison's arguments against a Virginia bill using taxes to support teaching Christianity? Why or why not? How are the rights of conscience and free exercise of religion similar or dissimilar? Do you believe the current wall of separation between church and state, as established by the courts, is consistent with the intent of the framers of the First Amendment? Why or why not?
I have no doubt that both religion and government will exist in greater purity the less they are mixed together. James Madison.
James Madison's arguments for keeping government and religion separate are foundational for a successful democracy.
influenced by John Locke, in Memoriam and Remonstrance against religious assessments, Madison wrote that the government cannot control consciousness. Therefore, there is no true freedom of religion without separation of church and state.
Funding specific religions over others contradicts the fundamental basis of democracy, as it is innately inequitable. John Locke asserted it was necessary to distinguish the business of civil government from that of religion in a letter concerning toleration.
He illustrated the importance of religion and government being separate entities because the government is unable to control belief. In his argument against the Virginia bill, Madison contended that freedom of religion cannot exist without complete separation of church and state.
The First Amendment, strengthened by the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, upheld these ideals, being applied in circumstances when religion and government conflict in our schools.
In Epperson v. Arkansas, the court ruled that a state law prohibiting teaching human evolution in public schools was unconstitutional, as the law was not secular and incorporated religion into education.
Madison argued an undeniable component of American government, that freedom of religion cannot exist without complete separation of church and state.
Rights of conscience can exist without religion, but free religion cannot exist without the right of conscience.
Both involve the fundamental right to one's morals. However, rights of conscience are deeply held moral convictions, while the free exercise of religion relies on the ability to act upon one's religious beliefs.
The similarities of conscience and religion are seen in the case of Washington State v. Bobbyton v. Norman. Bobbyton Norman, a religious cult member, was convicted for denying health care to his diabetic child due to his religious beliefs.
In this instance, the father's devout religious actions directly correlated with his conscious choice to deny healthcare, denying his freedom of religion in favor of medical safety.
Conversely, the concepts of conscience and religion differ in legislation.
In the Revised Code of Washington 7047160, it recognizes that every individual possesses the fundamental right to express their religious beliefs and conscience, establishing religion and conscience as separate entities rather than grouping them together.
Wisconsin v. Yoder expanded this concept after an Amish community replaced state-provided education with privatized religious instruction. The court ruled that people are not required to attend public school after 8th grade for religious reasons, but did not mention conscience objection.
While conscience and religion are related, critical distinctions are drawn between the two in a court setting.
Under recent court rulings, the historic wall of separation has deteriorated, contrary to the framers' intent.
The idea of a wall of separation originated in Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptists, as well as further individuals' natural rights.
The Establishment Clause of the First Amendment prohibits Congress from constructing laws that establish a religion, embodying the concept of separation of church and state as intended by the framers.
This separation was once proposed by the Blaine Amendment in 1875, defining a wall of separation as monetary barriers between taxpayer-provided services, religious institutions, and education.
However, recent Supreme Court decisions have altered this separation. In Kennedy v. Bremerton, the Supreme Court ruled a Christian coach had the right to publicly pray after a high school football game, contradicting multiple court precedents and blurring the lines of secularism.
22 years prior, in Santa Fe Independent School District v. Doe, the Supreme Court ruled that student-led prayer before football games violated the Establishment Clause because schools received government endorsement.
The ruling in Kennedy v. Bremerton supplanted the Santa Fe precedent, demonstrating how the courts are changing the division the framers envisioned.
Freedom of religion is a fundamental American value, and a wall of separation ensures the integrity of free religion remains fully protected. Thank you.
Thank you. So you're saying the court has veered from the intent of the framers in these recent decisions. What's the court's argument for why they're in the right?
The court's argument for the basis behind the Kennedy v. Bremerton case was there was historical context to back it up. And so it kind of supplanted, or it kind of altered the Lemon test, which was previously established in Lemon v. Kurtzman, and it ultimately cast it as useless, using this new historical context as a test.
It's important to note that the First Amendment has both the free exercise of religion, as well as the Establishment Clause of religion. So it seems that recently courts have been leaning towards the free exercise of religion and using that as their justification for more recent rulings.
Back to the topic of historical context, most of the initial state constitutions had religious tests for swearing into office or other positions of power, which kind of showed the fundamental Christian values established in this nation, which have been carried into the 21st century with the Kennedy rule.
Additionally, 8 out of the 13 colonies had an establishment of religion in their state constitutions, further exemplifying how much religion was of fundamental value for our framers.
So, a lot of times the Roberts Court nowadays is described as conservative, like politically conservative, legally. Do you think that their approach to the free exercise clause, is that inherently conservative? Would you describe it that way?
I would say that we are at a point now where the free exercise of religion has prospered more than it ever had, and I think that this is especially significant when we consider religions that are not Christian. For example, in 2020, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act made its way up to Congress and was eventually passed as a byproduct of that. And this was the work of 3 Muslim Americans who felt that the FBI were directly targeting them. So now we see that, although I do agree with my colleagues that the historical context of America is Christian, a change in which free exercise is accessible for all.
I would like to agree that to some degree, the use of the free exercise clause by the Roberts Court to some degree is, for them, could be seen as progressive and not necessarily conservative. This could be seen in Carson v. Macon, where government funds could send individuals to private schools when they might not have the opportunity to go to a state-provided school in a private religious institution made the most sense, and discriminating between religious private institutions and non-religious private institutions was deemed unconstitutional for them. So that free exercise, as illustrated in Carson v. Macon, could be seen as not a conservative, but rather a more progressive form of the use of the free exercise clause.
To contrast the Carson v. Macon ruling about 20-ish years prior in the early 2000s with the case of Black v. Davey from our own state of Washington, the Supreme Court ruled that schools could utilize state scholarship money either for or for not religious instruction, but they had to choose one of the two, which was the Supreme Court's way of avoiding this entanglement, which is the other religion clause in the Bill of Rights, which shows that the Roberts Court nowadays is focusing more on the free exercise clause rather than simply the entanglement.
So sorry, I want to push a little bit more on this just so that you can clarify for me. I thought I understood you to say that the deterioration in the wall is contrary to the intent of the framers and the founders. But I've also heard you make a fairly strong argument that lots and lots of Americans at the time that the Constitution was being created didn't see that there was such a strong wall. So am I misunderstanding, or is there another reason why you think the deterioration of the wall is a bad thing today?
I would like to argue that the founding fathers built this country on the principle that religion and government should be separated. However, regardless of that, we can see that the history of our nation is largely entangled with Christianity. For example, in the Supreme Court case of Van Orden v. Perry, we can see that there was a monument with biblical quotes written on it, and the Supreme Court ruled that this could be maintained because Christianity is simply a component of our history. So albeit I do feel that the founders did not have the history to make it this way, that our history still leans towards a greater non-intended inclusion of Christianity into our history.
It's important to note that many of the founders were believed in religion. For example, John Adams believed that the world would be hell without religion. However, they did not advocate for it to be intermixed with government. Additionally, when the Bill of Rights was first passed, it was only at a federal level, allowing for the current establishments that states had to continue. However, this was overturned with the 14th Amendment and incorporation through the 20th and 21st centuries, as seen in Everson v. Board of Education, when the Establishment Clause was incorporated to state levels.
Many of the founders were influenced by philosophers such as Voltaire, who believed that it was necessary to separate church and state because there would be an inherent influence from religion into the governmental systems if they were combined.
And I'm curious if you can get more specific on like what legal standards do you think need to be in place ultimately? Because I have heard, during the opening statement you mentioned like there should be a complete separation of church and state, but then you're saying, well, because of history, there could be some, intermingling there. So like, where do you draw that line? How should courts draw that line?
So one of the main cases we see for the issue of entanglement of religion and government is typically in schools. For example, in the case of Levi Weissman, the Supreme Court decided that, or utilized the sort of coercion test, in that if a teacher is praying or having a moment of silence, it kind of coerces these students into practicing this religion as well as the teachers are in a position of academic power over the students.
And I think that the greatest solution to this would be equitability. For example, in our school, Tacoma Senior High School, we have the option for Mormon students to attend seminary class where during what could be a free period, they can go to the local church and practice over there. At the same time, during the month of Ramadan, there is a classroom for students who are practicing Ramadan to have that private space where they can have that enclosure with other Muslim students. So I think that in this regard, we are looking towards equitability and accessibility for all religions, because that is what America truly values.
Building off of that, the courts do struggle to balance the free exercise clause with the establishment clause, but that's ultimately what needs to be done. In the case of Sherbert v. Berner, it was they struck a balance between the courts after an employee was fired for exhibiting the day of the Sabbath, and they were fired for this. However, the court ruled that that would violate the free exercise clause, and so they ruled that they had the right to take off the day of the Sabbath for their religion, but they also didn't endorse that religion in that institution.
It's important to note that.
Pardon me for interrupting. How should the court settle the case then that's before them this week about the postal worker who didn't want to work on Sundays? Amazon convinced the U.S. Postal Service to do 7 days a week. This gentleman said, no, Sunday's my day of prayer, I don't want to work. What should the courts decide in that case?
So I believe you're referencing the case of Groff v. DeJoy, which is taking into the question of the previously established definition of accommodations for religious exemptions in Transworld Airlines v. Hardison, and in which the court ruled that as long as these accommodations don't really interfere with workplace practices, then they would be required for enabling this individual to practice their religion.
Additionally, under the First Amendment, we do have the right to practice our religion under the Free Exercise Clause. So the government and corporations with the control of the government do have a role to ensure that people can practice their religions freely. We've seen that in schools, and in this regard, I think that the case should be ruled in favor of the Postal Service individual.
Furthermore, we do see a trend where when a government system and when a private corporation are put against one another, that the free exercise clause is ultimately triumphant. In the case of Fulton v. the City of Pennsylvania, we can see that when there was a Catholic social service provider which refused to have their foster children be in the homes of same-sex couples, that when the city attempted to bar their contract with this group, that the Supreme Court ultimately decided that this was unconstitutional because the free exercise prevails.
Thank you.
Congratulations on mastering a head-spinning number of cases and historical references to bring to that discussion. That was excellent. I like that you had such command of your opener that you didn't have to use your notes and you could, it just makes it easier to follow along when you've got when you've got it all measured out. They actually understood what you were saying and it was all constructed well, and it gave me some jumping off points to ask you in the follow-up questions. Great first answer. I think you did this all the way through. My colleague might have something to say about how many of you answered each question. But my first question, everybody offered something additive to the conversation. So it was a way to show how broad you guys could take a given point and that you were all listening but making different connections to the subject matter. So great job.
Yeah, I mean, clearly you know what you're talking about. Like, you have a very strong knowledge base here. It really shined, I think, in the conversation. I really liked that answer, the nuanced answer you gave to that first question. That was a little bit of a curveball about conservative, liberal, particularly since, like the Sherbert case, which came up, that was decided during a very liberal court, and yet now with a more conservative court, you almost see them going back to something like those standards, which is interesting. Like, why is that happening? But I thought your answer to that, including bringing up the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, was really well done. So I thought overall, I mean, it was just you had like a through line, through your entire argument, and in the Q&A, it just really patched very well together, I think. So excellent job.
So they say all the really nice things, then they leave me as the former teacher. Because I agree with everything that was said, but if I were your teacher, I would say, is there a distinction to be drawn about the founding generation between the separation of church and state at the national level and the state level? And was that for philosophical or pragmatic reasons, right? Why does Article 6, Section 3, the no religious test, which I'm sure you know, why doesn't it apply to state elections at the same time? Because that would go to very directly to the question of whether the founders and the framers believed in a real separation. If they really believed it, why didn't they put it on the states? And why didn't Madison's amendment get through the Senate when he wanted to bar states from discriminating on the basis of religion? I mean, I think what you presented is really tremendous. I also, because I'm from Massachusetts, because I just got done looking at this last night, I'm sitting here thinking about John Adams and the wonderful things he said about religion later on, but the Mass Constitution allowed for religious tests. And I think John Adams wrote it. So again, we've got this wonderful, eloquent expression of separation of church with the actual document. That's the sign we gotta go.
Great job.